Welcome to our Webinar Wednesday series here at Jamesway. I'm Dr. Keith Bramwell. I'm Director over the Hatchery Consultant Program globally. Pleasure to be here and to host another webinar. Just a few housekeeping situations. As we go through the webinar, once we allow Dr. Hubbard to give her presentation, if you have any questions at all, there's a QA box at the bottom. Go ahead and type in your questions at that time. We'll address as many of those as we can when we are finished, when she's finished with her presentation. Always get a question of who will be, or can we get a copy of this? Yes, you will all get a link in the next couple of days that'll have a link to the video part of it, so you can rewatch this, because we know we have a lot of our registered guests plan on watching it later if they can't make it live. So we'll have that, and then you'll be able to get a PDF of the presentation as well if you've requested. So with that, I will go ahead and well, actually, one more thing. We've got a Spanish. Will be available in Spanish translation. So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little, looks like the world interpretation box. If you want to click that, then it'll send you to, you'll be able to hear the simultaneous translation of that. Mauricio, do you want to jump in for a minute and direct a few more people to the Spanish version?
Of course, sir. Bueno, nuevamente bienvenidos a los webinars de los miércoles con Jamesway Incubation Company. Como siempre es muy bueno tenerlos acá, y las notificaciones o bueno, las noticias que siempre damos en todos los webinars. Recuerden, si tienen alguna pregunta, en la parte de abajo van a ver un botón de Q y A para las preguntas. También la grabación y un PDF auxiliar se les enviará al final o en los próximos días. Y para los que siguen acá escuchando en español, está la parte de inglés. Entonces, para cambiarse a la traducción simultánea, en la parte de abajo van a ver un botón con forma de mundo, y es Interpretation. Con ese botón pueden acceder directamente a la traducción simultánea. Nuevamente, bienvenidos y espero disfruten la interesante charla. Ok, sir.
All right, thank you much. Okay, brief introduction of Dr. Hubbard. She's a Southern girl from Mississippi. She got her bachelor's and her master's degree from Mississippi State University, and then stayed there and got her veterinary degree as well from Mississippi State University, and then stayed on the Mississippi State, stayed with them for 18 years, working there. The diagnostic portion, I believe, of the veterinary college there. Spent a few years with Merck, and now been the last couple of years she's doing private consulting, does a lot with Avigen. You may have seen her through the Avigen things, but she has her private consulting as well. So if you have any questions or interest, and I think her contact number will be on there, or you can get with us at any time. So very happy to have her here. Like I said, we've been working for several months to get this scheduled. So with that, Dr. Hubbard, if you share your screen, and I will let you go. I will still be on here if we need anything, but I'll let you at it.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Let me get this, and you let me know if it is showing up correctly.
There we go. Yep,
okay.
Looks good.
Okay, let me move some of these little okay, I'm sorry, it's the menu will not disappear. There it goes. Okay, there it goes. Okay.
Right.
So first of all, I want to thank Jamesway for inviting me to speak to you guys today. I'm going to try to go into what I consider missed opportunities in hatchery quality assurance, or some of you may refer to it as quality control. So let's just jump right into this. First, I'm going to talk about why we think QA procedures are important and why we should be doing them in the hatcheries. In my mind, I think of two main reasons we do QA procedures. One is to solve hatch problems, and the other is to solve chick mortality problems. So in the QA procedures that you are doing, some of these that you do to solve hatch problems should be telling you if you're having any fertility issues. They should be telling you if the incubation time or your hatch windows are correct. It should let you know if your incubation environment is correct. It also should give you a clue as to whether or not you are losing eggs or chicks somewhere along the process during incubation. And it also gives you a clue to the egg pack integrity as well. Some of the QA procedures that directly go towards solving problems with chick mortality basically give you an idea of how good is our chick quality. How good are the chicks that we are actually sending to the farms? What is the quality of the egg pack? Are we chilling or maybe even overheating chicks after they hatch? And then it also should give you an idea if your washers, like your tray washers, your box washers, are being maintained properly. So when you're doing common QA procedures for hatch problems, the ones that should come to mind are things like egg candling and candling breakout analysis, egg residue breakout analysis, egg shell temperatures, pre-pool counts, chick box counts, specific gravities, and moisture losses. When you're thinking of QA procedures, that might help you solve mortality problems. And you'll notice that some of this actually overlaps with the QA procedures for hatch. But some of the things that we commonly do or routinely do in hatcheries are chick quality assessments, egg pack evaluations, hatchery sanitation checks, or you might refer to them as just running plates, egg residue breakout analysis, chick rectal temperatures, washer checks, looking at things like temperature, disinfectant, nozzle maintenance, and specific gravities as well. Now, for today's discussion, I am not going to go into great detail of each QA procedure. I'm not going to outline how you do the procedures. I'm going to assume that most people that are listening to this webinar have some sort of a QA set up in the hatchery. Even if it's not an individual person doing it, a lot of these procedures are getting done in the hatcheries, maybe by multiple people. So I'm not going to go into detail about each procedure, and I'm not even going to cover each QA procedure that I've already mentioned. What I'm going to focus on are the common missed opportunities that I see in some of the routine QA procedures that are being done. And I gather this just from years of working side by side with QA personnel, correlating with them on their QA procedures and all. And just things that I think, since you're doing the work anyway, why not gather more information from it? So we're going to start out with candling. So candling typically is either done by a table or a flashlight looking at each individual egg. Personally, I like the flashlight procedure, but in either case, it's so important that we make sure that the light intensity that is being used, especially on these tables, to make sure that you can clearly see the clears. If the light intensity is not correct, you will miss some clear eggs. Also, I noticed that a lot of QA people strictly just look for the clear eggs. They're not noting things such as hairline cracks and upside down eggs. And this is very valuable information for the breeder department to be able to use, and you're getting it in a timely manner that they can go back to the farms and maybe get these issues corrected. Also, it should give you a clue as to what the eggshell quality is looking like. Since you're being able to put this light on an egg in the dark, you can see the porosity of that egg. And I'll have some pictures later when I talk about egg pack assessments that you can also see on candling that you may need to note if you're seeing it in significant numbers. Also, some of our hatcheries, the way the machines are designed, you can actually make doing residue breakouts more efficient. For example, like in our multi-stage chickmaster machines, you can do candling on trays in your multi-stage chickmasters and mark those same trays with a little tag like shown here on this slide. And you've already removed all your infertiles, you removed your early deads, and you can just transfer that information to your residue report. And now when it comes to doing your residues, you have less eggs that you have to break out. So it makes it a little bit more efficient. Now, I do realize candling, a lot of times is not practical in some of our hatcheries, especially like our single stage hatcheries, but it is something that we commonly do in many of our multi-stage hatcheries. Okay, so on breakout analysis, it is different than doing a residue breakout. It's not as detailed, I guess it's a proper way of saying it, as a residue breakout. Usually we're going to have the eggs in a flat of some sort with the large end of the egg sitting up. We're going to remove the tops of those eggs, and we're not going to pour out every single egg. Okay. I know some managers, especially like breeder managers, get upset when they see QA personnel doing this because they don't think they're doing an accurate job of calling fertility. But you have so many eggs that you usually need to candle, because typically we're doing every flock every week, that this is a practical way of doing it. And usually, if the eggs are done while they're still warm and you have a very well lit area, the germinal disc will float to the top of the egg. So once you see that germinal disc, you should be able to easily make that call as to whether it's fertile or infertile. If it's a very dense dot, like shown here on the picture at the bottom to the right, if it's a very dense dot, it may be a little irregular, but if it's dense, it's likely to be infertile. If you see a donut-like shape with a clear center in it, it's likely to be fertile. So this is the most difficult thing for someone to call. Okay. If you're dealing with eggs that don't have a blood ring yet, so this means they're less than 3 days of age, it can be quite difficult sometimes to make this call, especially if that germinal disc does not rise to the top and is very easy to see. So I always tell everybody, my motto is, if you're in doubt, pour it out. It is okay to pour these out, but obviously you're not going to be pouring out every single egg. And I've seen QA personnel do this for years. And once they get very good practice at it, they do an excellent job and they're extremely accurate. So I slipped this slide in because I want to make sure, if you are doing candling, that you are doing candling breakouts. And I know some of you probably think that that's obvious. However, I have gone into hatcheries before where they're only doing candling and they're not breaking out the eggs that they've candled. So the eggs to the left in this photo, which kind of look like lemonade, they're going to look clear because we have no blood rings in them. And so the cases of the hatcheries that are not breaking out eggs, they are calling these infertiles, when clearly they are actually fertile. The photo to the right, you're seeing an egg, and there's actually one in the background sitting in the flat as well. Both of these eggs were called earlies because it appeared that they had blood rings in them, when in reality they had just hairline cracks and the yolk material had dried down and discolored. And so it did appear like they actually had blood rings in them, but they didn't. And so you can see how the numbers can get skewed if you're not breaking out the clear eggs or the eggs that you're candling and making more accurate calls. So now we're going to move on to egg residue breakouts. This is one of those procedures, QA procedures, that the majority of the hatcheries here in the US actually do. I want you to be paying attention to the In-ovo hole. The majority of our hatcheries in the US do In-ovo vaccination, and the majority of them use one type of machine in their operations. This particular machine makes a punch hole, and then the needle comes down through the punch and should not even have to touch the eggshell, and administers the vaccine into the egg. So when you're doing a residue breakout, you need to be looking at these In-ovo holes. The first thing is it in the large end of the egg? If it is in the large end of the egg, that is telling you that the farmer is placing the eggs correctly into the egg flats. This is important information for the breeder department, because if they're not, this is definitely going to affect hatch and chick quality. The next thing is it a punch hole or is it a needle hole? So yes, you see in the photo at the top of the page here, a punch hole, which are the two eggs on the outside of the photo, is much larger than the needle punches on the two eggs on the inside. A needle punch with a clear and clean needle is still going to vaccinate that embryo. However, it's the following embryos that I'm concerned about, because now we have more issues with clogged needles because it actually had to puncture the shell itself. So we're going to have more clogged needles and we're going to have more bent needles. And so on egg residue breakout, if you're seeing a lot of these irregular holes, like the picture to the left at the bottom, this may have been caused by a bent needle because that needle was having to make a puncture hole. Also, you need to be noting whether or not you're seeing no punches at all, like the photo to the right. So you're going to see some of this on egg residue breakout. Needles break, punches break, we're going to have some issues. And it's okay to see a little bit of that. But if you see a lot of it, it could be significant, because every egg needs to be vaccinated. Every embryo needs to be vaccinated, because these vaccines do not pass from bird to bird. And so if we have a no punch or issues with needles where that egg is not getting vaccinated, we have a missed bird, a bird that did not get vaccinated. So this is very valuable information that you could be gathering on egg residue breakouts to feed back to the hatchery manager, because the transfer or the In-ovo operation does need to be evaluated if you're seeing an excessive amount of these needle punches, bad punches, or no punches at all. Okay, this is a very common mistake that I see QA personnel do. If the In-ovo hole is in the large end, and then you open up the egg and you see hocks or legs looking at you, that is not an upside down egg. The In-ovo hole is telling you that the egg was placed in there correctly. The proper way for an embryo to position itself is like the photo to the left. It should position itself with its head under its right wing. Okay. Now, this bird on the right is obviously upside down, but it's not that the egg was placed in there upside down. It's that the embryo is malpositioned. And calling malpositions is very important. Malposition is likely something that happened during incubation, and an egg that's placed upside down is something that happened at the farm. So it's very important that you don't put an upside down chick or a malpositioned chick as an upside down egg. It's just something that I commonly see people do. Okay, I don't know anyone that actually has turning or turning angle issues on their residue breakout forms, but there is a lot you can see in the residue, in these embryos that are unhatched, that will tell you or give you a clue that you might have a turning angle issue. Not necessarily a turning failure, but a turning angle issue. If you see that your late dead have increased, your malpositions have increased, the embryo is extremely wet. The embryo is going to be damp anyway, but these are much wetter and damper than the normal late embryo. Fluid and albumin, like an albumin plug, as you see in this picture here, are often in the bottom of these eggs. The membrane itself will have an absence of a white spot, and I have a picture of this on my next slide. And often these chicks will have abnormalities. So when, like the picture to the left, I'm showing you kind of the white spot there in the membrane. If you're seeing that and you're seeing these very wet embryos, like the photo in the middle, with a malpositioned embryo in there, and like I said, sometimes they actually have abnormalities as well. And you're also seeing chicks that actually hatch, but they look scruffy. That's the best way I know how to describe them. They actually look like they're wet, but they're not. They're dry. And it's not yolk material. It's just this fluid that was all left in the egg. If it didn't kill the embryo because he actually can drown in all this fluid, he may hatch, but he looks very, very scruffy. So if you're seeing these chicks out in the field, or you're seeing them coming down the line, or you're seeing them on your chick quality assessments, which we're going to talk a little bit about later, this is a good clue that you might have a turning angle issue and should be noted on residue breakouts. So whether you see egg yolk mottling on candling or residue breakout analysis, it also should be reported. Basically what this is a disturbance of the vitellin membrane. And there's a number of different things that can cause it. I sort of describe it as a darker colored yolk with sort of shadows in it. It almost looks somewhat scrambled. I see this. I have seen it personally when we've had mycotoxin issues in the feed. And I often see it when people delay doing their breakouts. So for example, if something, you got busy, you didn't get to do your breakout, so you save them for the next day, you're going to see a lot of this disturbance of the vitellin membrane. So don't make it, make a false, assumption that this is stress or toxins or something like that. But if you do them rather quickly and you're seeing this and you're seeing a significant number of them, of these types of mottled egg yolks, it's worth reporting because it may be something going on the breeder farms. Okay, and then some miscellaneous things for residue breakouts. I personally like to have the entire hatching basket or hatching tray to be able to look at even the eggs that have already hatched out. Often I go into hatcheries and they'll collect the eggs for me and put them in a flat for me to break out of. I want to see the entirety of that basket for several different reasons. One is I like to look at the meconium score. Now, you don't have to actually score the meconium, but how much meconium is left on these eggshells? A little bit's okay. I don't want to see them totally clean, but I don't want to see an excessive amount of meconium either. That's telling me that your hatch window is probably really wide. You had a lot of chicks that hatched early. It may tell me that you're overheating chicks. And so the meconium is getting all over the eggs because you're stressing the gut of the chick. So that's one good piece of information you can get from having the entire hatch basket as well. Another thing is moisture losses. Now, moisture loss is a really good QA procedure, but I have a lot of hatcheries that just don't have the time or the personnel to be able to do moisture losses correctly. So use those hatch eggs and look at them to give you a clue as to how your moisture losses are. Are we losing too much moisture and the chicks are hatching low? Or are we not losing enough moisture and they tend to be hatching high? Now, I caution you, don't look at any pips that you have in the tray and make that call. Because the ones that are actually did not get out of the shell and they've pipped, we know they had trouble getting out of the egg. Okay, so that's not a good gauge as to whether or not your moisture losses are correct. Look at the eggs that the chicks have already hatched out of, and that will give you a pretty good clue as to where you are on your moisture losses. Also, are you seeing a number of dead chicks on the tray? This can give you a clue that you might have a bacterial issue in your hatchery. You may have a tray washer issue. Something might be going on that's causing all these dead chicks on tray. And then one of my pet peeves is when I go into a hatchery and they call everything that looks like an early crack a farm crack. It may actually be a hatchery issue that you're calling a farm crack, and it never get investigated because we assume it's a farm issue. I like to call them early cracks. It happened early, and like I said, it could have happened in the hatchery itself, but this is one of those things that I just prefer to call them early cracks so we can try to investigate it and figure out where it's going and rule the hatchery in or out, and then we can go back to the farm and see if it's actually something that happened at the farm. Egg pack assessments. One thing that I know a lot of people do not have on their egg pack assessments is porosity. If I can walk into an egg room and look at eggs and I see that the eggs are very porous with my naked eye, hopefully you can appreciate that in these pictures, how very porous these eggs are. If it's not an older breeder flock, that's concerning to me. So maybe we need to have the breeder department do some type of supplementation with nutrition on the breeder farm. Now, if it's an older flock, we know eggshells are thinner in older flocks, but I definitely want to note if I'm seeing the porosity, because I'm going to then compare it to the age of the flock and make sure we don't need to do some type of supplementation out there. This is just showing you when you candle, you can see that porosity a lot of times when you candle. The next thing is there is a difference to me between what you might hear people call windowing versus porosity. This photo here is showing what we call windowing. And when we deal with mycotoxins, this is the type of egg we're seeing. You don't have those little pinpoint little dots on these eggs. It's almost like the calcium is just gone from that eggshell. So if you're doing your egg pack checks and you're seeing a lot of that, or you're doing your candling and you're seeing a lot of that, potentially you could have a mycotoxin issue, and that needs to be reported to the breeder department. Blood-stained eggs. This needs to be reported as well. If it's in a younger flock just coming into production, that's somewhat normal, not of much concern. But if I'm seeing a lot of blood on eggs, we might have an issue out there with peck outs or blowouts on the breeders, and maybe the breeder department isn't aware of it yet. So that is something that needs to be noted and reported back. Next is uniformity. Within that same flock, are the eggs uniform? We know when we look at these eggs, we're going to get 2 different size chicks out of those eggs. This could potentially mean that we had a feed issue, that the flock itself is not uniform. But if you're seeing an excessive amount of ununiformity or non-uniform eggs in an egg pack, that should be reported as well on that egg pack assessment. Wrinkled eggs. If you're seeing a lot of wrinkled eggs, malformed eggs, this potentially could be viral and must be reported to the veterinarian. If you're seeing, to see a few is not totally uncommon, but if you're seeing an excessive amount when you're doing an egg pack assessment, this may mean that there are so many of them coming through the system that the farmer cannot get them all out. Okay, so it's worth noting. Also, check eggs to make sure they're not being washed or washed incorrectly. In the US, most of our companies do not allow washing of eggs because it typically is not done correctly. So as you can see in the photo to the upper right, a lot of times you'll get this little dried circle or brownish spot on the bottom of the eggs. And that is just basically from the condensation of the water on the eggs, and then gravity allows a little droplet to form on the bottom of that egg. And then when it dries, you get this brown spot or circle. So if you're seeing that as you're doing an egg pack evaluation, that is a clue that someone is either washing eggs incorrectly or eggs got wet somewhere along the process, and it needs to be investigated because this will definitely lead to bacterial contamination, typically Pseudomonas issues. You could also use a black light if you have one available to you. Turn the lights off there in the egg room. And even though you're probably only doing your egg pack evaluation on a few flats out of a buggy, look at the entire buggy with your black light, because most people are not washing all their eggs. They're only washing a few flats of dirty eggs. And so you want to make sure you're able to catch this if possible. So look at the entire buggy with your black light. And this is also a good opportunity while you're doing your egg pack assessments to take temperatures, eggshell temperatures in the egg room. Do you have enough airflow in your egg room? You should not be more than 1 degree Fahrenheit from the top, middle, and bottom on eggshell temperatures in the egg room. If you are, this potentially could be causing you issues where you will see that your hatch windows are much larger. Now I'm going to move on to chick quality assessments. Basically, chick quality assessments, you're looking at chicks after they've been processed, and basically, what am I sending out the door? What am I sending, good or bad quality chicks to the farms? Did I maybe overheat them during processing? There are things you can see on the chicks, and I think I have a picture of this, that will tell you that potentially those chicks had been panting, even if they're not dehydrated at that time. Also, what are the navels looking like? We're going to go into more detail on that in a second. And then if you're seeing a lot of culls in the boxes, we have cross beaks, maybe no eyes, things like that. Do you have somebody on the line that's culling these chicks out? There's two things either going on. They're doing a poor job, or maybe there's so many of them that they can't cull them all out. So it definitely needs to be noted if you're seeing a lot of culls. So with dehydration, what you're going to see is that the shanks of the chick are dark in color and look very dry. A blood vessel does not dehydrate. Okay, so these chicks will have a blood vessel that runs along the inside of the leg. And many times you can actually see the blood vessel. That does not mean that chick is dehydrated. What you are looking for is the tissue around that blood vessel, has it lost moisture? And then the blood vessel does not dehydrate, so it will stick out and you'll actually see it very prominently. The other thing is bone does not dehydrate. So you can actually see each of the bones in the joints there of a chick that is dehydrated as well. All the tissue around the bone, it has lost moisture. Some people say that when you start seeing the tips of the chick's feathers start feathering out, that's the first sign of dehydration. I'm not sure I actually buy that it's the first sign of dehydration, but I don't like to see it. You should still have little fuzzy tips. They should not be feathering out yet. If they are feathering out, these chicks spend a lot of time in the hatcher or hatched very early. The other thing is, and I hope I did not have a good photo of this to show you, but when you look at a box of chicks, hopefully you can see it on this chick. There are what I call little crusties on the edge of the mouth. Okay. So what that is a chick will cool itself by using evaporative cooling. So he's going to pant and he's going to lose moisture. But when he's doing that, this moisture will accumulate around the outside of his mouth. And in an environment that he is in with all the chick down, that chick down is going to settle there on the outside of his mouth. And he's going to develop these little crusties, these little dry chick down on the side of his mouth. So if you're looking at boxes of chicks and you're just seeing every one of them with these crusties on their mouth, that is a sign, even if they're not panting at that point, that is a sign that potentially they were panting somewhere along the process. Some miscellaneous characteristics that you might see. Red nares, this is like abrasions on the beak or look like abrasions on the beak. This might give you a sign that you have hot embryo temperatures towards the end of incubation. You might see some of the what I call singed chicks. We call them singed chicks because they actually look like you took a cigarette lighter and burned their down off. This is typically going to be due to hot temperatures during early to mid incubation. You're going to see some of these in different types of machines that we use, incubation systems that we use. If we get hot spots in there, you typically should not see a lot of these type of chicks. And then definitely do not overlook if you have any type of mechanical trauma. Most of our hatcheries are very good with maintenance, but if you point out you're seeing pinched toes or peeled skin or anything like that, the maintenance guys can usually get on that very quickly and get that solved very quickly. Another thing to note is the coloration. A lot of our hatcheries in the US use formaldehyde. And I'm using this photo again because I thought it was kind of a good one. Formaldehyde typically will give that very yellow color to chicks. So if I'm looking at chicks and I see a wide variation of color on those chicks, very yellow chicks and then very white chicks, that's telling me that my hatch window may be way too long. The chicks that hatched later did not get that exposure to the formaldehyde because we have to stop the formaldehyde before we have human workers get in that area. So that coloration could be very important. Another thing to note, if you're using dye application with your spray vaccines, did we miss box of chicks? Do we have just 1 or 2 chicks that are colored? You're going to have some chicks that don't have dye on them, and because we depend on the chicks to preen and get vaccinated in that manner. However, sometimes we have issues at hatcheries and boxes get taken off the line, but are they placed back on the line to go back through the spray vaccination? Or are we sending missed chicks out in the field that didn't get the respiratory vaccines? These are all things to note as you do your chick assessments. Now I'm going to talk about some naval issues. And the reason I put this in here is because I come across multiple people that call all these things differently. So this is my I'm trying to try to get everybody kind of on the same page as how we're calling this stuff. So when we communicate with each other, we know what everybody's talking about. So this is actually what an open navel is. The abdomen did not close down, and we actually have yolk material exposed and yolk material in that navel. Okay, so this is what I would call a true open navel. Then you'll have what we call a large navel scab, or some people refer to it as a button because it typically looks like a button on a shirt. Okay. So basically, the abdomen has closed down. It entrapped a large amount of yolk there. And what we usually use as a rule of thumb is that you call it a large scab or a button if it's larger than the chick's eye. Okay, so that's kind of the gauge you use as a chick's eye. Then we have our small navel scabs. These are smaller than the chick's eye. But as you see, the abdomen has closed down, but we just entrap maybe a tiny bit of yolk as well in that navel. So that would be a small scab. Then we have what people pick on me about saying is beef jerky chicks or my navel tags. The abdomen has closed down, but it entrapped a large amount of yolk outside of the navel. To me, it's very important to distinguish between if we have small or large scabs versus a navel tag. Okay, because this can give you a clue as to how to solve the problem. We all know that about day 19, that chick is already going to have taken in a large amount of yolk. So say you're transferring at 19, but you're constantly seeing these navel tags, a large amount of yolk trapped outside of the navel. That should tell you that is a very likely chance that that happened in the setter before you transferred rather than in the hatcher. So it helps you maybe hone in on where to actually go solve the problem if you're seeing tags versus scabs. Then this is what a lot of people call navel wicks, or you may hear some people refer to them as strings. I personally don't like the term wick, even though I use it, because it gives that connotation that it is wicking in, it can wick in bacteria. typically that's not the case. These usually will dry off and not actually cause an infection issue. Now they can accompany a scab and those chicks may get infected. But typically, if I see a lot of these, I'm also seeing a lot more of red hawks, and they should be noted because if you're seeing a lot of red hawks and you're seeing a lot of wicks, that may give you a clue that maybe we have something going on with moisture losses, humidity, something like that. So they are worth noting, but this is not a tag. I do have a lot of people that like to call these tags. This is a wick or a string. Rectal temperatures. This is a very important QA procedure. I personally like to use an actual chick probe that you can get to go with your coopers, and you can calibrate it to it. They work very well, really not very invasive at all, and you're getting a core body temperature. You can get a measurement very quickly, and you should be trying to get these measurements very quickly. And they should be checked in the environment that you're trying to measure. Because as you can see in this graph, the rectal temperatures will decrease very quickly as they get out of as they're out of the environment. So when you're, when you are checking rectal temperatures, say in a hatcher, you need to work very fast, grab the chick, do not pull the trays out because they're going to cool down very quickly. Reach in and get a chick and get its temperature. And do a few chicks before you move on to the next hatcher. Because they are going to decrease in temperature very rapidly. I like to have rectal temperatures checked not only in the hatchers, but anywhere that you might have chicks staged. So in hallways, in the separator room, or in the chick processing floor as well. Unfortunately, chick comfort is one of the most difficult things for hatchery managers to manage. We might do an excellent job on incubation, and then we lose the chicks later on, say in the separator room or in the chick processing room because we get them overheated. Or maybe we chill them too much and then they tend to pile in the boxes. And then you have chicks in the middle that are going to get overheated. So it's very important that we're constantly monitoring temperatures of our chicks and all these different areas that you stage chicks in a hatchery. Pre-pull counts, or some people call it cumulative hatch. A lot of people go in 12 hours before pull, and they actually literally count chicks to see where they are on their hatch window. This is an excellent time to take some of those rectal temperatures. See where you're at on rectals. It's also a really good time that if you are having a hatch issue, say you have, 1 to 3% of hatch, you just cannot figure out where it is. It typically is going to be lost eggs or lost chicks somewhere along the process. So while you're counting chicks, go ahead and count the unhatched eggs as well. So for example, if you know your tray is supposed to have 168 eggs or 162 eggs in it, and you are consistently during your pre-pull counts getting a significantly lower number than that, that is telling you that we are losing eggs probably somewhere around transfer. Could have happened in the setter. Maybe we had a crash or something like that. But where are we losing these eggs? And then you can investigate more. Is it a consistent thing? Is that what's always happening? And you can try to figure out where these lost eggs are going. Once again, that's another picture of this may be where we're losing eggs. The transfer crew is removing them and nobody is really investigating it, so we don't know where that's happening. We have cases like this. We just don't have the eggs there. Are we doing a good job of getting these broken flats out of the system? If we leave them in there, you send them to a farmer, they're going to use them because you sent them to them. So there you lost eggs that you think you had and you think you set, but in actuality, you did not. Checking the washers. This, to me, needs to be an actual QA procedure Most hatcheries I go into do not have it as a QA procedure. Maybe the hatchery manager or the assistant or somebody's going back there every now and then and kind of checking water temps and things like that. But this is so important. If you have a DOA or a high bacterial issue, especially like dead on tray, if you have these issues, it's likely that it could be a tray washer issue. So you need to have somebody constantly, I say hourly at least, checking water temperatures, disinfectant levels. It's also a good time to just peek at those nozzles, make sure nozzles are functioning correctly. This can be a very easy and quick QA procedure that people could put into their system that may actually save a lot of heartache down the road. So with that, I'm not sure how much time I took up there, Keith. This is my contact information. If anybody wants more information, maybe you want me to go more in depth with you on some of the actual procedures, I'll be glad to do that with you. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and take any questions that you guys may have.
All right. Thank you very much. We've got a few questions that are already piled in.
Okay.
So one of the questions, somebody said, if you had the choice, and I'm not sure why they have a choice, but to measure your shell temperature during incubation or air temperature in your chamber, what is the best option?
I like eggshell temperatures because your air temperature is basically wherever your probe is. And I want to know, what is that embryo feeling? What is it experiencing? And I like personally to do eggshell temperatures. You know, to me, you're going to get better information from that and what that actual embryo is feeling.
Because you're actually measuring a temperature right where the embryo is, rather than it.
Correct.
And I know
And make sure
sometimes,
you are doing that and you're
yeah,
not actually doing it at the air cell, because you
yeah,
can get a lower reading on the air cell. Make sure you're actually getting an embryo temperature. And it correlates very well with actually doing embryo temperatures, but this way you're not having to sacrifice the
right.
chick. It's not an animal welfare issue. And eggshell temperatures correlate very well with embryo temperatures.
Good, perfect. Another one is, can you go into a little bit more detail about the strings? You talked about a little bit about it and what is normal and what's causing this.
Okay, so the strings, or the wicks, is
We don't call them wicks, right?
that's right, I know. And let me go into a little bit more detail about that. One of the reasons, I don't like term wick, and I say it doesn't really wick in bacteria. In my former life, when I worked at the diagnostic lab, we used to do a lot of chick checks. So a lot of our companies would send in chicks and we would number the chicks, and then we would write down whatever characteristics we saw. So if you saw a wick, you noted it, and we cultured the yolks in these chicks. And so I went back and did a retrospective study, and all the chicks, I looked at hundreds and hundreds of chicks, and all the chicks that had wicks, you know how many chicks grew any type of bacteria? 0. Now, my open navels, my large navel scabs, my tags, that's where all the bacteria was. The wicks, I had 0 chicks that had wicks that we grew any bacteria out of. So that's why I hesitate when people think that actually causes bacterial contamination in the baby chick. But usually if everything is perfect in incubation, that wick or that string, that string is going to dry off and fall off during the hatch process in the hatcher. If maybe you have a little bit high humidity, or not a good airflow, or something that's causing more moisture to be in that incubator or in that hatcher, it may lead to more keeping of that string, and it doesn't dry off there and fall off. It usually will dry off and fall off on the farm in the first couple of days. Like I said earlier, it does usually, when I see a lot of them, I usually see a lot of red hawks as well, which can be correlated back to maybe moisture loss issues. These chicks had a hard time getting out of that shell, and those wicks just did not dry down and fall off.
So if it's not a true wick, like you're saying, because we don't draw on bacteria, I mean, you're not saying then that, well, the wicks aren't a bad thing. I mean, they are an indication of something.
Right,
Mm,
correct. And that's why I said they are worth noting for sure.
Yeah, okay.
But maybe we should all call them strings and not call them wicks.
Well, you're the
Because
one
they
that
don't
told us to
actually.
do that.
I
You're the
know,
one
and
that
then I
told us to
keep
do that,
copying.
then
Yeah,
you switched halfway through, so.
hard habits are hard to break sometimes.
Yeah, I know, I understand that. Okay, for an egg pack assessment, and you're looking at eggshell color and opacity of the shell, what is this is there any certain signs there that are indicative of what might be going on with the flock and the breeders?
There's a few
I mean, you
things I can think
mentioned a
of. So,
few, but
when you're talking about color, the first thing that comes to mind is if you're seeing extremely white eggs,
right.
you could potentially have a know if you say chemical toxin, something like that, that has gotten into the breeder feed that shouldn't have gotten into the breeder feed, that has caused this to happen. You'll have a lot of early deads as well. But if you're seeing, and I mean white eggs, not just pale eggs, but extremely white eggs, that needs to be brought to somebody's attention immediately, because potentially we had some type of contamination in the feed of the breeders. I actually find that in today's birds, I don't see the coloration in the eggs that I used to see. I don't know if it's nutritional. I don't know if it's genetic. But a lot of times when we have very white or pale eggs, whitish pale eggs, the eggshell integrity is not that great. And so that's one reason that I do like to do specific gravities, because you can put a number to it and actually somewhat measure what the eggshell integrity is. And you'll find a lot of times on these lighter colored eggs, the specific gravities are not as good.
Yeah, and that going right along with what you're talking about here, because I've seen the same thing when I was at university. We did a trial, and it's like, okay, how much does color matter? And the only way pigmentation mattered is if it was really white, like you mentioned. We're not supposed to set those anyways, but those real dark and in between, we didn't see any difference in that normal range. But like you said, I agree. I think eggs are getting lighter colored in general, but within a
Yeah.
flock, it's not a difference unless we're setting those real white eggs, of course.
Yeah.
So if you can't handle all the eggs in a machine, I mean, and I have a joke I make about this, but in your opinion, how many should we do and feel comfortable?
I think a lot of it is going to depend on your machine type. For example, in your Chickmaster multi-stages, if you are going to try to correlate that with your residue breakouts, and say you're going to break out 3 trays for your residue, well, then do 3 trays worth of candling. I guess I've never really put a percentage to it. In my multi-stage Jamesways, they can't do it quite as early as our Chickmasters can, but a lot of them do get in there right after transfer and catch those eggs there in that 5th position. They're doing pretty much every egg that they can see on each side, so they're doing a large number of eggs. You could probably tell me better than I can of how many that is, but what I just would like to just get a good clear picture of what the fertility may be doing. And I'll tell you something else that is very helpful from the diagnostic standpoint for me is if somebody is doing candling and getting fertility by house and not just by farm. Because what you'll note a lot of times when you go in and you're looking at candling reports and fertility seems to be going up and down and up and down, they're a lot of times only doing it by the farm. And what may be happening is maybe we have a parasite issue or a disease issue in one house. And so when they're doing candling, they don't know which house they're doing or whatever. So, it can help you solve the problem if you were actually doing it by house.
Yeah,
it can make a lot of sense.
And if somebody sees, and I've had this before, where somebody sees like fertility in a flock, say a flock fertility drop like 10% in a day or two. They asked me about it. I go, something didn't happen at the farm, because you can pull all the males out and fertility is not going to drop 10% in a day or two. It's not going to happen. So then you start looking at how you're calling it or something like that. But so
that's a lot of what I do is correlate with QA on fertility checks. And a lot of times I've been called in by the breeder guys But just to make sure that it is being called correctly
Mhm.
is very important
Yeah,
information.
that's what I see as a lot of the issue in there. Another question is for the air cell. We know how the air cell is formed in an egg, and it's typical in the blunt end of the egg. Periodically, we see them like on the side of an egg or something. How does that
Mhm.
happen? I know some turkey people say that, and we had this a few years ago in a commercial duck hatchery. They were seeing a lot of them on the side. What causes that, or do you know?
What I have seen that I know causes it, but I'm not gonna say it's the only cause of it, is with these automatic egg gatherers that we have now, I am seeing a lot more of that. I mean, it is literally looks like it has broken free and it's on the side of the egg. Now, I have not taken these eggs and incubated them separately and to see if they can hatch correctly. I'm guessing they don't. But with rough handling, I think that air cell can break loose. And because, like I said, I am seeing a lot more of those. When I see them, if I'm in there candling and I'm seeing a lot of those, almost every time, if I ask them if they have an automatic egg gatherer, they say yes.
Really?
So
Okay.
there's something going on there, maybe with the transitions. Maybe the transitions aren't real smooth. Maybe we're running the belts a lot quicker. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think it's a disruption of some sort, and it's rough handling is what I think is going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't know for sure, but I envision if you've got an air cell like on the side or partially on the side, as we continue to have moisture loss in that air cell continues to grow, and it often does expand into that blunt end. So if it's seeing it
Mhm.
early on, it's not the end of the world because it could very well expand into where it's supposed to be anyway. We don't know that, but
That'd be a
would
good
you-
trial sometime to collect a
yeah.
lot of those and just set them, just watch
So,
them and just
so
see.
somebody's got to spend days out there collecting enough of these.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah,
I see them, but I don't see them like commonly. I don't see
yeah.
them.
Yeah, we don't say more common either. When you're talking about the formaldehyde in the hatcher and saying you got to pull it, what is the proper time in your opinion to apply formaldehyde in the hatchery?
Oh, that's a loaded question.
Yeah,
Everybody has, and you might have a better opinion about that, but everybody has a almost a somewhat different um application process. You know, I don't really want to give any type of guidelines on that because there's so many different ones out there, and I think a lot of it depends on your ventilation in the hatchery
right.
and things like that. So
I
I really
almost
don't want to.
I almost didn't ask you that question for that reason because I was
I don't
like,
want
I
to step
don't
out
really.
there and say that one.
Yeah, so that's fine. And there was a couple of discussions about the formaldehyde. I do know the formaldehyde, it's, we have to care for the people there, and that's why you're talking about, you got to get out. We got
Mhm.
people still working in there. We have a lot of places now that are starting to just completely do away with it. So, having to look at different options, for that,
Right.
but it has been used for a long time. Um,
Yeah, and it's been a good product. It's been it definitely does help.
Yeah. When you're doing chick scores, is there a certain time when you're scoring them and doing the do you I mean, how many do you actually call out that score, and you just score them and put them all back in?
So if I'm doing it, I typically would go ahead if I see a cull, I will take it out. Personally, I do that. I don't know.
Recorded on there. It was bad, and we called it.
Right. I'll record it and I usually do box counts as I'm doing it as well. So I'll actually count it because it was put in the box. But just from an animal welfare aspect, I'm not gonna just leave that cold chick struggling sitting in that box. I'm gonna go ahead and have him euthanized
Yeah,
the correct way. So I'm gonna go ahead and take him out. I usually do.
yeah,
And usually the hatchery manager wants you to, it's just one that
yeah.
basically got missed and should have been taken out anyway. So
Okay, just real briefly, I know you covered it, but a couple discussions on this. What is a primary factor for poor navels? If we're just trying to troubleshoot, just blanket, where were we mainly going to look? And I know because sometimes, well, it could
yeah.
be this or it could be that, or it could be
Yeah.
this, could be that, but
Yeah, that's one of those things. If you read up on it, it could be high temperature, could be low temperature, could be high
yeah.
humidity, low humidity. It's just like everything you can imagine to do with incubation could cause it. And that's true. I mean, it could be a number of different factors. In general, If you're having a lot of like open navels and navel if you're having a lot of open navels, like we just did not close that navel down, I start thinking about, did we slow the chicks down? Did we cool them down? I think water. Did we have a leak? Did we transfer them into wet trays? You know, things like that. Something to do with water that may have cooled them down and slowed them down. If we have large entrapped yolks, like the tags, the big large navel scabs, then I start thinking about, did we overheat them? Did we send signals to that embryo, hey, I'm hot, I'm ready to hatch, it must be time for me to get out of here, so let me close down my abdomen, but he hasn't taken in his yolk yet, but he has closed his abdomen down because he got overheated. And then that's how you got an entrapped yolk. And like I said earlier, a lot of times if I see tags, I start thinking maybe setter, or at least 18 days before he really starts taking that yolk in, 18 days or less, versus 19 or older, where you're going to typically have more of the scabs than you are going to have the tags.
Yeah. Okay, this is a fun question for you.
Oh, I'm scared of that.
Now, you know, it's an issue that we all deal with. So we've got a lot of places now, we have fertility that's just not what it used to be. It is not. So when
Right.
we're particularly in like a multi-stage where the incubator is having to use the different ages of embryos and stuff, how much of a effect is that having on our hatch when we have such high and low fertilities?
Depending on the machines, it can be huge. So, in our multi-stage machines, especially like multi-stage Jamesways that depend so much on an embryonic heat, it is huge. We all, excuse me, we all know that if we set what we call skips in our machines, that definitely has effect on our hatch and our chick quality. Well, to me, when you have lack of fertility, you basically have artificial skips in there. And so you have the same result. You don't have that embryonic heat that the multi-stage machines really depend on to warm up the younger eggs, because your eggs are going to be endothermic for the first, 1 through 9, 1 to 10 days before they become exothermic. Once they become exothermic, we depend on that heat to warm up the endothermic eggs. And you cannot compensate that by just turning the temperature up on the machine. I wish we could, but we can't. Not in the multi-stage. And so it is impacting it greatly right now. I am hopeful. I think I see everybody kind of turning the corner. I do see younger flocks coming in, I think, a lot better. And I'm hoping that that means that we're going to be holding that for those fertilities for much longer as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm starting to see it a little bit, but it's been rough for a while.
It really has. It
And
really has.
and we've had some like in multi-stage where you know they have to put in some low fertility, so they just don't have a proper mix in there. And it
Correct.
takes 3 or 4 or 5, some people say 6 weeks to get that whole machine back to where it should. But if we're continually having that, we're just always playing catch up on those.
Right.
Dealing
Right.
with
It's been a real issue the past, I'm gonna say at least 2 years. It's been a major
yeah,
issue.
for sure. I think in most
Yeah.
of our visits out, that's an issue right there. Okay, fertility.
Right.
Yeah, okay, now we get past the fertility stuff. So in
Mhm.
your opinion, when we're looking at like chick boxes are not disinfected properly, we're seeing some debris, and maybe we're not sanitation's not as great. How much of an effect do you really see on the farm from that, in your opinion? How much of the farm can be attributed right back to the hatchery?
It depends on like what bacteria you're talking about in my mind. I know for a fact, because I have worked with multiple hatcheries that have had an issue with contaminated tray washers, because we've all seen these tray washers in these hatcheries. They are not designed where you can easily clean them. Organic matter is going to hide in them. We're putting a lot of organic matter in them. And so even the best sanitation crew is going to probably leave some organic matter behind. So if we are not properly maintaining, making sure our water temperatures never dip below 140 degrees, making sure our pumps are always working, making sure all of our nozzles are always working, making sure that they are running the disinfection at the level that it should be run at. You stub your toe on any of those items, that's when the bacteria is going to rear its head that's hiding in there, and it's going to cause you problems. And I have a lot of hatchery, excuse me, I have allergies. I have a lot of hatchery managers, but the first thing they tell me when I start telling them and think they have a contamination issue in their tray washer, they'll say, well, my trays are coming back plate and clean. You got to think about it. You're checking one little spot on one tray. Okay. So I can tell you that I've seen it over and over again. If you have high DOAs, that's usually the number one thing, a lot of dead on tray. You go and you look in that area between the separator and the tray washer, and you've got a lot of dead chicks that have fallen out of trays. I can almost guarantee you probably have a contamination issue in that tray washer, and it is hiding in there somewhere. And hatchery managers that I have gotten to address that, it's an easy fix a lot of times because they get on it really quick, maybe break the entire tray washer down as much as they can. Maybe they never foamed their tray washer before, but foam can get in areas that they typically can't with high pressure. So we get in there and we just clean it better than we've ever cleaned it before, and it'll just break the cycle almost immediately. I go in and I give that story about the contamination in tray washers, and I had a hatchery manager tell me once when I went to visit, he started telling me what the problem was. He started telling me about the DOAs. They are very mushy. They look very decomposed, that type of scenario. And I had one hatchery manager actually, before I even stepped foot into his hatchery, he said, well, you can go now. And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, you solved my problem. I know exactly what he said. My boiler's been down for 3 weeks. So that's exactly what's happening, so I've seen it way too many times, but it definitely can be a problem. I'm more worried about the tray washer than the box washer, because when those baby chicks first hatch and that navel's wet,
Right.
that's when we're going to get the bacteria in there. Hopefully by the time we get to the boxes, our navels are good and dry, and we won't be pulling in any bacteria from the boxes themselves. But I want them clean.
Yeah.
But for years, we wash boxes once a week. We still have some hatcheries. That's all they can do is wash them once or twice a week. And they do fine as long as the navels are good and healed.
Yeah, when they're in that hatching basket and they come out, yeah, that navel is not, they're not ready to pull yet. And so they're like scooting over that basket, and the more, contamination you have from those eggs or eggs above them or whatever that's dripping down, you may not see it then, but you'll see it when they get out the field, when that has a chance to really start growing. One more last thing real quick, about the windowing or modeling, we called it on the shelves. Can you explain a little bit about that again? What causes that, and if that's a real issue for us to deal with? And then one other one is your cracks. I mean, are all cracks bad? Or the little, you talk about the little hairline cracks, and then you have the cracks that are like, you can feel the shell, disturbed.
Right. So the windowing, I personally experienced this, I'm gonna say a year and a half, 2 years ago, when we had a real issue in the U.S. industry with mycotoxins. I was seeing these windowing of eggs. I was seeing the mottled egg yolks on breakouts and candling. Very significant numbers of these. And when I look at that big picture and I see all that together, what it was coming back that, and a lot of early deads went through the roof at a lot of places that didn't have mycotoxin binders in their feed. So what happens, in that situation, I'm not really sure what the actual physiological effect is on that egg and why it looks like that. But it definitely is to me a sign that maybe something is going on. We know with stress, like heat stress, the eggshells are going to get thinner. And some people think that actually causes windowing. I personally have not seen that. I've seen the windowing effect coming from mycotoxins themselves. Okay. I've been in hatcheries where I've seen that, and I'm looking at eggs, doing an egg pack assessment, and I say, have you ate this flock here? Because you might see it in one flock. And I'll say something about, has this flock been seen, seeing mycotoxins or anything like that. And, they kind of look at each other side-eyed and they're like, well, actually, this is a flock we have mycotoxin. We know we have mycotoxin issues in, so I can personally say I have seen that. With the cracks, I don't like any crack. I mean, a crack is going to allow contamination to get in the egg. It's going to play havoc with your moisture losses. You're going to typically lose more moisture. Obviously the really obvious cracks, that is definitely, that egg will probably not hatch at all. The hairline cracks, you can actually kind of, in a way, to me, get a clue at transfer or on your residue breakouts as to whether or not you have an issue with transfer cracks, true transfer cracks, like the transfer crew is being careless, or something's going on with the machine, versus hairline cracks. So when you see those just smashed eggs that look like transfer cracks, that's machine issue, crew issue, something like that. When all your transfer cracks are looking like the bottoms just blew out, a lot of times that's hairline cracks. So that can kind of give you a clue sometimes as whether or not you're dealing with hairline cracks versus transfer cracks. Now, once again, the automatic egg gatherers make life simpler, but I do tend to see more hairline cracks with those. And the grower cannot see them. The farmer cannot see them on the farm. A lot of times it takes time for that egg, the permeability of that egg to change and all.
Yep.
And then you can actually see it more with a flashlight or something down the road. But I don't like any cracks. Because I think it does play havoc with your hatch because it's messing with your moisture losses and it's allowing more bacteria into the egg.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. A lot of really good information that you shared with us. We have a couple of questions that are a little bit more detailed, and you send them to you.
Well, they have my email now, and so just send them
Yeah.
on, and I'll do my best to try to answer them.
But really appreciate you. Very good information. Very good discussion afterwards. So glad we finally got this scheduled. And thank you everybody for coming and participating in our webinar Wednesday series, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you again, and hope you all have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.